Brett Walter. I'm the founder and CEO of Climate Action Now. We are here tonight because we share an understanding that the election of Donald Trump to the US presidency would be catastrophic for our climate and our democracy, and we want to do everything in our power to prevent it. The question is what to do. How do we use our limited time and money to maximum effect? To answer that question, Climate Action Now has organized this series of How We Win events, in which our questions can be answered by experts of the US political system and leaders of organizations that are working to get out the vote in crucial swing states and congressional districts. We've already had one How We Win event with Nathaniel Stinnett of the Environmental Voter Project, and we are putting a link to the recording of that event in the chat right now. We strongly recommend the Environmental Voter Project for your consideration. I'd like to thank Dr. Marianne Krasny of the Civic Ecology Lab at Cornell University for proposing this series and using her influence to assemble our speakers. I'd also like to thank Liz Bridgewater, Climate Action Now's Director of Outreach, for crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's to make this happen. Thanks to our moderator, the irrepressible Jessica Craven, author of the hugely popular Chopwood Carry Water Substack. We'll have a link to her Substack in the chat, and an ardent champion for climate and progressive causes. Thanks to Robert Hubble, author of the Today's Edition Substack, for helping promote this event. Thanks also to David Callahan, our speaker tonight, for his valuable time and insights and his lifelong commitment to our democracy. And most of all, thank you for showing up when the showing up most matters. This election is our moment, the moment when our generation of Americans is called upon to defend the American experiment. And it is your passion, your commitment, and your love of this great nation that is the ultimate answer to the question of how we win in November. Thank you for coming. So, as Kamala said at the beginning of her acceptance speech, let's get down to business, shall we? Over to you, Jessica.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. Hi, so nice to see you all. My name is Jessica Craven. I am just your humble moderator today, so you won't hear from me for long at all. I am mostly here to say, first of all, I am so honored to be a part of this event and frankly, the entire series. I have construction going on right outside my window, so I hope that's not too disruptive. Brett, thank you for having me. And I will just get right into it, which is that this is a subject matter that, as any of you who subscribe to my newsletter know, is very close to my heart. I'm extremely passionate about two things. One of them is climate action and the climate crisis. I am above all things a climate activist, but I am also extremely passionate about giving money strategically. And nothing pains me more than to hear really well-intentioned donors giving their money in places where it just won't do all that much good, when such wonderful other places are being underfunded. And so it really thrills me to introduce someone who founded an organization and a publication that I've been following for a long time and recommending all over the place. It is David Callahan. He is the founder of Blue Tent. He founded Blue Tent in 2021 after 25 years of working in progressive organizations and media. In addition to leading Blue Tent, David is editor of Inside Philanthropy, which covers the world of philanthropic giving. And Blue Tent essentially is a terrific resource. It helps donors give effectively to elect Democrats and enact policies for a fairer America. Their timely recommendations are grounded in research and due diligence, and they are right on every time. So I am so excited to hear David talk today about how best to use our money to move the needle in the direction that we also passionately want. So with that, I am excited to hear Mr. David Callahan. Let's turn it over to him.
Thank you, Jessica, and I really appreciate being here. Thank you for the invitation to present to this group. So, Jessica, I totally share your horror when money is given ineffectively, and it is that exact feeling that led me to start Blue Tent. It was after the 2020 election, and everybody is panicking, everybody's giving huge amounts of money or as much as they can, and a lot of it went to some pretty stupid places, right? Most famously, Amy McGrath raised $100 million plus to run against Mitch McConnell and predictably lost by like 20 points. So I set out to try to help donors be a little more effective or a lot more effective in their giving and create a blue tent. I'm going to share my screen because I have a slideshow about some slides. So let me just see if I can get that going. So can everybody see the screen okay?
We're not seeing it, David.
Oh, you're not seeing it. Oh, hold on. Forgot the all-important step, which is to actually share. Okay, take two. Here we are. My screen is showing now, right? Great. So just a quick overview. Blue Tent, as Jessica mentioned, was founded in 2021. We're an independent research site to help Democratic and progressive donors give more effectively to win elections and also drive policy change. We're supported by paid memberships and donations. Blue Tent is not a funding intermediary. Donors give directly to recommended groups through Act Blue. I'm going to say a little bit more about Blue Tent's recommendations in a minute, but let me just talk about this moment that we're in, which is this moment of incredible energy on the Democratic side. So since Joe Biden dropped out of the race, small to medium donors have just become incredibly energized, giving record sums. Kamala Harris has now raised over $500 million, which is just a phenomenal sum of money. And my guess is that that's going to continue. According to Act Blue, there was 4.2 million small donors who gave 10 million contributions to 15,000 different organizations related to Democrats and progressive causes in July. And 45% of them were, 45% of the money raised came from new donors. So just this phenomenal amount of energy, very similar to what we saw in 2020, which a lot of people stepping forward who want to do something here. And the challenge, of course, is to kind of make sure that energy goes in the right direction. And I'll say more about that in a second. But let me just emphasize a point that I don't think gets made enough, which is the big advantage that Blue America has in this contest for power with the MAGA movement is that we have money. So you hear a lot about the structural advantages that the Republicans have, right? The Electoral College, the Senate. I mean, there's now they have a real big advantage on the judiciary and the Supreme Court. But what liberal and Blue America has is money. Voters making over $200,000 supported Democrats in the last two presidential elections. This stat really impressed me, but that today Americans in the top fifth of the income ladder are more likely to vote Democratic than any other income group. And where the money is it's in largely coastal areas and in metro areas. In 2020, the counties that voted for Joe Biden accounted for 71% of GDP. So this is the knowledge economy that is producing so much of the wealth in the United States right now is really in these coastal and Blue America parts of the country. whereas Republican coalition is increasingly made up of downscale voters, and we've seen this kind of realignment of more college-educated voters coming into the Democratic coalition and more low-income voters voting Republican. And I think that there's a lot of ways in which that's not a good thing, and that this sort of realignment along class lines of our politics is still being sorted out. But one thing we can say for sure is that this is an advantage for Democrats when it comes to raising money. And, for all of the money that Harris has raised, it's really just a scratch of the surface of what could be mobilized by people who are freaking out in affluent blue America. And most people do not make political contributions, and it's a problem. And many political donors who do make contributions don't give nearly as much as they should. My mother actually is a great example of somebody who should be making political contributions. She's very worried about the prospect of Trump getting back in office, but she hasn't made a political contribution since 1992. And there's just a massive gap. Maybe you've noticed this, Jessica, like a massive gap between the level of anxiety people feel about Trump getting back in office and people's ability to align that with their giving. And again, even those people who give often don't give enough or nearly as much as they could. And if you think about it, like what do you care more about? Leaving your kids a little extra money for their inheritance, if you have extra money, or stopping Donald Trump from getting back into office, right? And I think many people, if we had confidence, would pay quite a bit of money to make sure that guy doesn't get back into office. So beyond the resources that are out there, another important point to keep in mind is that right now is a very good time to be engaged in political giving. And the first reason for that is that elections are really super close right now. I mean, closer than at any time in memory, in terms of the polarization of the electorate and just how small the margins are in many states. And here's the thing: closer margins amplify the impact of money, since more funding can translate into more votes, especially if it is well targeted. So, if you give money for a Senate race in Missouri where it's almost for sure going to be a blowout Republican victory, almost no amount of money you give is probably going to make a difference there. But if you give money in a super close battleground state or a super close congressional race, it will have a lot more impact. And, one of the criteria, of course, if we're to give money is you want it to be focused on elections which are close and elections which are high impact. And I'll say more about that in a second. The second, just to say a little bit more about one more thing about these close elections, which is, most people seem to forget just how close the 2020 election was. I mean, it changed 43,000 votes in that election, and Trump would have won a second term. Biden won Wisconsin, Arizona, and Georgia by like 43,000 votes, and it was a razor thin election. And Trump won in 2016 by about 77,000 votes across Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And so we could easily have an election that's close, that is similarly close this year. Likewise, Democrats lost the House in 2022 by just 6,675 votes, which is just a astonishingly small margin. And in addition, one of the candidates we funded in Arizona for the Attorney General race won by only 280 votes. Very important race. Second reason for the growing impact of giving is that there are better options. So since 2016, there's just been a tremendous amount of investment in progressive infrastructure. There's all sorts of new organizations that have started, tremendous amount of energy that has come into this space. And as a result, donors have much better choices than they did before 2016. And these organizations have now gone through 3 election cycles, 2018, 2020, 2022, as well as special elections. They have better data. They have done more testing, more analysis, and all this has sort of produced better giving options for progressive donors. So it's a really good time to be giving compared to earlier eras in American politics. But there are definitely barriers to being able to give effectively. Most donors encounter, which is there's no independent research on the effectiveness of left of center electoral groups or candidates. It's not like, the stock market where you can get really good analysis of company earnings and, all sorts of other sort of data to guide your investment giving, historic returns. And it's not like that at all. There's very few resources, which is a big reason we created Blue Tent, is to offer some independent research. And there's so many options that can just feel overwhelming. I mean, you just look at your text messages, right, from the last day or last week, or or your email. I mean, just you're being bombarded by different appeals all the time. From candidates, from campaign, PACs, from organizations, and people just get overwhelmed. And when people get overwhelmed, they tend to shut down. And then there's also a lot of really bad stuff out there. There's deceptive fundraising tactics, and people make emotional decisions. They give for the wrong reasons. I mentioned how the House control of the House, Democrats lost by less than 7,000 votes in 2022. Well, that same year, the top fundraiser for House races was Adam Schiff. And Adam Schiff comes from a totally safe blue district and raised over $20 million in 2022, even as Democrats in very close races couldn't barely raise enough money for a field program. But Schiff raised so much money because people love Adam Schiff, after the impeachment and the dramas of the Trump years. So people are like, I love Adam Schiff, I'm going to give him money. But he didn't need it. And so you got to be careful of giving to people just because you love them, and be careful of rage giving. So there was a Democrat who raised $16 million to run against Marjorie Taylor Greene in 2022, and he predictably lost by almost 40 points. And so you don't want to give just because you hate somebody. So let's just talk a bit about kind of principles for smart political giving. The first one is use intermediaries. So since 2016, there's been, as I said, a lot of development of progressive infrastructure. There's a lot of new organizations, and there's also new funding intermediaries, which go out and they do the homework and they figure out where money should go. They keep tabs on the fundraising needs of different candidates or organizations, and they know where to allocate money when. A couple different examples of this: Movement Voter Project, which I would strongly recommend people check out. Way to Win is another funding intermediary, a little more for well-heeled donors. Focus for Democracy, Mind the Gap, Sister District, Oath, Swing Left. I can talk about any of these in more detail if people are interested. But the point here is that there is a growing kind of set of institutions that will help you with your giving. You don't need to be going out and doing all this vetting and research by yourself. You just need to figure out some good funding intermediaries that you can turn to. Another principle for smart political giving, and this really reflects the blue tent approach, which is to prioritize organizations over candidates. Now, this is totally the opposite of what most people do. Most people, when they think of political giving, they think of candidates. Candidates are people. You can relate to their need to raise money, to mount a campaign. I totally get it. But Blue Tent doesn't recommend giving to candidates. By and large, we have some state legislative candidates that we recommend giving to, but at the for federal elections, we don't advocate giving to candidates, and there's a reason for that, which is we believe donors will have more impact by giving to organizations over candidates. Organizations work up and down the ballot, delivering more impact for every dollar. So Arizona is a great example of this. If you give to the Senate candidate in Arizona, who's a Democrat there, or you give to one of the House candidates, you will help their campaign, but you won't necessarily help Biden win Arizona, or you won't necessarily help pass the abortion ballot initiative in Arizona. Whereas we recommend people give to Lucha, Living United for Change in Arizona, which is the top grassroots voter mobilization group in Arizona that's been working across multiple election cycles to turn out voters and has a plan to contact 1 million voters in this election cycle. And Lucha, by contacting voters, mobilizing voters, turning out voters, it will help everything that is on the ballot, all Democrats in Arizona win, whether it's Biden, Ruben Gallego, the two House candidates, the state legislative candidates who are running in Arizona. Democrats have a good chance to flip the state legislature in Arizona. So if you give to a statewide organization, you can help, achieve all of those goals. Same is true in Michigan. We recommend a group there called Michigan United, which is going to be working to win a toss-up Senate race, working to ensure that Harris wins Arizona, and working to ensure that 3 different competitive House races are won by Democrats in Arizona. And sorry, in Michigan. I'm getting my states confused because there's so many of them, 7 different battleground states we're thinking about. The other thing about organizations is that they often have built up trust over time and connect better with voters. So these organizations, many of them have been Lucha as an example in Arizona, or Michigan United. They've been working in the field for 10 plus years, and they know these communities well, and they know voters, and they have a real sense of what can move voters. A lot of them spend a lot of attention on local issues that are close to people's hearts, to connect with them better. And so during national elections, they can really tap all of that accumulated capital to help turn out voters. I mean, remember, a huge barrier here is that many people just don't believe that politics can change their lives at all, and don't think that there's any reason to vote. And political candidates and campaigns just don't have a lot of levers for moving low propensity voters to get out and vote. And so the vast majority of funding by political campaigns is spent on advertising and trying to sway the vote choice of a small number of likely voters. They don't spend a lot of time trying to get low propensity voters out to the polls, and that's really not what they're best at doing. But organizations can do that because they have the trust. They are the trusted messengers, and they can turn out voters. And so by strengthening democracy is another dividend when you give to an organization over a candidate. And win or lose, whatever happens in a given election, these organizations are still there for the next election cycle. Whereas the sort of sandcastle effect of campaigns is that if you run a campaign and lose, then you close up shop, and the millions of dollars that have been spent don't leave anything behind. So broadly speaking, when it comes to organizations, there's two types of organizations that people might be attracted to. There's data-driven organizations that really they're just laser focused on what will turn out, what will produce the most net Democratic votes. That is votes for Democrats that would not have happened absent an organization's efforts. Data-driven groups, they use randomized controlled trials to kind of figure out and test different approaches, so they have a real evidence base of their outreach tactics when it comes to email or digital outreach or mail or canvassing messages. And then they go back and they evaluate their results looking at voter files so that they can see like how they did in each in a given election cycle, and then fine tune for the next time around. The other type of organization, and these differences are a little bit amorphous, so don't take them too much as freestanding archetypes, because there can be a lot of blending here. But there's organizations that are not so focused on metrics and data, and instead they're engaged in a long-term power building strategy in a given state or region, and they have outreach goals. They want to knock on a certain number of doors or make a certain set of contacts through text messages or email, and they do evaluation and keep track of their outreach, but they don't have great ways to kind of test exactly the effectiveness of their work. Most of them don't use randomized controlled trials. Lucha would be an example of one of these groups I'm talking about, that it's not I think super rigorous compared to some other kinds of organizations. So I just throw these two types of organizations out there because different donors are attracted to different types of groups. Some people really want to follow the data and find the most cost-effective option. Other people really like the idea of funding grassroots groups that are engaged in a power building strategy. Both kinds of organizations are very important. I don't want to say that one is more important than the other. And in many cases, the movement groups are the only groups you can find, and especially that's true of in a given region or a given congressional district. And I can talk more about that if people are interested. So Blue Tent, we have a bunch of different recommendations. I can just sort of spotlight a few of them, and then in the discussion we can kind of get into more of the ins and outs. But let me just go through the list here and say what kinds of organizations these are. So the Center for Voter Information, I think, which has been around for 20 years, is probably the most cost-effective option that donors have out there for increasing net Democratic votes. It uses primarily mail to contact voters, mailings, and it does a lot of randomized controlled trials to try to test the effectiveness of its mailings. It also uses digital outreach, text messaging, email to follow up with voters. It will contact some voters up to 5 to 7 times. It seeks to first register voters, tries to get a lot of people registered by mail, and then we'll follow up with them to see how to make sure that they're moving through the process. Its overall kind of framework is that it wants to increase representation within our democracy of groups that now vote at lower rates than the rest of the population, Black and Latino voters, young voters, and it can point to 2020 as a year where it really had tremendous impact. So that's one choice. Galvanize Action is an organization that I'm particularly excited about this election cycle. It's focused on moderate white women. So it turns out white women are the largest group of US voters, and particularly in these sort of upper Midwestern battleground states, they're an extremely large part of the electorate, as much as 50%. Interestingly, Democrats have not won white women in a national election since 1964. But Biden came close, winning 48% of white women. And I think that this is a year with abortion on the ballot where we could get over 50%. And Galvanize Action is really at the forefront of this work in an exciting way. It uses evidence-based strategies to persuade moderate women to vote Democratic. A lot of its work is in rural and suburban areas where these women live. Happy to say more about that group, but I'm a big fan. Rural Democracy Initiative is another of our 4 top recommendations. And again, this is an area where Democrats have struggled. We've lost voter share in rural areas, and it has been a big strength of Trump. And here's the thing. Democrats don't need to win a majority of votes in rural areas. We just need to lose by less. And Rural Democracy Initiative is the kind of central, most important hub right now for progressive organizing groups around America that are trying to increase Democratic vote share in rural areas. And it has about 150 different groups that it supports, mainly in the battleground states. Working America, finally, our last recommendation is Working America, which is another group that uses a lot of evidence and testing, but also is very invested in a long-term power building strategy to connect with working class voters. I mean, this is another area we hear a lot about Democratic struggles with working class, particularly white working class voters, where we've consistently lost that group for 60 years. And again, we don't need to necessarily win a majority of those voters, but we need to lose them by less. And one of the reasons that Biden won in 2020 is because he did better among those voters than Hillary did. And if Harris can, replicate Biden's margins with that group, she has a good chance of winning office. So finally, Blue Tent has a spinoff project called People's House, and People's House is focused on recommending organizations in 15 plus battleground districts with GOP incumbents that donors should give to, offering a alternative to giving just to House candidates. And there's there's a good reason that we decided to make a real big focus on House races this year, which is that if worse comes to worse, and Trump wins the White House and Republicans win the Senate, which is highly possible given the nature of the map. The House would be this all-important firewall against MAGA extremism and essential to protecting our democracy. And with the House, we're only a few seats away, like 5 seats away from winning the House. And there's about 16 Republican incumbents who are in very vulnerable positions because they're in districts that Biden won in 2020. So lots of potential to pick up seats and to flip the House. I think it's of all the goals, winning the presidency, keeping the Senate, or flipping the House. Flipping the House is the most easily obtainable one for Democrats. And so we're making a big push there. So that's it. I have other recommendations I'm happy to go into, including state level groups, but why don't I just end there?
Great. Well, thank you so much. And Jessica, I see we have an amazing group of really good questions in the chat. So I'll hand it over to you to get as many of those answered as we can.
Yes. Marianne, I'm just going to tell you this because I don't have time to write it in the chat. That document you sent me was the wrong document. We were trying to exchange questions that way, but I'm going to just start working off of the chat and hopefully we'll have a chance to get that resent. So let's see. We're just going to start. First of all, that was
Jessica,
amazing.
yes. Sorry for interrupting, but I just sent you all the questions in the chat too. So can you try there?
Great. Terrific.
I think it should work. I know there's tons of questions and I'll send you a few more messages.
Indeed. Okay, great. That sounds really good. If you had one question I've got right now, if you had X amount to donate, how would you apportion it by percentage to presidents, senators, and House reps?
Yeah, I think it just depends where you what you feel passionate about. I mean, it's all important. I think winning the White House is the most important thing, but it's also going to be the best funded of this. I mean, judging by the fact that Harris has raised $500 million in the last 6 weeks gives you an indication that probably money is not going to be a problem for her. On the other hand, there are organizations in these battleground states that are still trying to raise the money they need to do their work. In Nevada, for example, we recommend a group called One APIA Nevada, which is focused on Asian American and Pacific Islander voters who are like 12% of the electorate and very swingy in that state. And as people have probably been following, Nevada might, could easily be picked up by Trump. It's like dead even at this point. So a few thousand votes among Asian American voters could really make the difference. And that group is not kind of benefiting from the shower of money that Harris's campaign is. But that organization has an ability to connect with voters in a way that no presidential campaign does. I mean, there's like 7 different major Asian American and Pacific Islander groups in Nevada who require very kind of culturally competent outreach. So I'm just giving an example of how I think about these priorities, which is who's underfunded, what's important.
Okay, thanks, David. Somebody asked, are progressive corporations more shy about making political donations? The Republican Party seems to be bought by the fossil fuel and gun industries. Should a progressive priority be to get money out of politics?
You know, it's interesting how the issue of money in politics seems to kind of have faded from the progressive agenda as we have ended up raising so much money on our side. And for sure, there's a lot of negative things about the current system, with, the corporate influence, the role of these big tech donors trying to, influence Harris's future economic policy. I mean, some real negative things there, but there's a tremendous amount of liberal money out there. And, it'd be great to limit the role of money in politics, but my focus has really been on how do we get more of it in right now from our side. And then we can come back later to the questions of reform.
Right. Oh my gosh, there are so many intriguing questions here. All right, next one we've got is it best to give a larger sum to one organization or to spread slightly smaller amounts to a handful of organizations?
Again, that's a choice that you can go either way. I think that we talk a lot about a balanced giving portfolio at Blue Tent, which is that, it may be that you think that this data-driven approach that I was talking about earlier is the way to go because you can be assured of the cost effectiveness of your donation. So maybe you make your biggest donation to a place like the Center for Voter Information, where you have real high confidence that that's going to be money well spent. And then maybe you make a smaller donation to a grassroots group like the one I just mentioned, one APIA Nevada, where there's sort of less confidence that every dollar will be spent effectively, but it's extremely important. You might want to sort of prioritize the presidential race by and large, given the stakes there, but also put some money into the House as a kind of insurance strategy, right? If we lose the presidency, we have to have the House, and maybe you kick some money to that Montana Senate contest because John Tester right now is the most endangered Democrat in the Senate, and if he loses, Democrats will lose control of the Senate. So you might want to think about that. But again, there's no hard and fast choices here. It's just what kind of moves people.
All right, that was great. Oh, I'm gonna just tell you this question that I'm seeing in the chat right now because it's a question I get a lot as well. Well, she's asking, how do you feel about donating to Act Blue? Can you explain to people what Act Blue is and isn't? Because I know people often ask me as if it is a thing that you're donating to instead of through.
Yes, excellent question. So Act Blue is mainly just a platform for processing donations. So just about every progressive organization, every candidate will have an Act Blue page or an Act Blue link. And if you're a regular user of Act Blue, your credit card will be saved there and you can see all your past donations. And so you can kind of keep track of what you're doing through Act Blue. It's a great tool. Act Blue does also have like a general Act Blue fund that it can, people just want to give to Act Blue. Also, Act Blue raises money for its own operations to sustain itself. So you can give money to Act Blue, but mainly you just use Act Blue to give money to other organizations or candidates.
Thank you for answering that. Okay. Yeah, we're getting quite a lot of questions about how to avoid text overload from the Harris campaign and other organizations. I'm getting so many emails. I'm getting so many texts. How do I stop that? Does that even work? One person asked, why do they do that? Anything you can say about that?
Yeah, I realize I had one more slide that I forgot to share, which was all the things to not pay attention to. Which is any text that you ever get, except if it's from a friend, anything on your social media feed, any email you get, unless it's from like a high quality funding intermediary or some other source you really trust. Just tune out everything that you can. And also, unfortunately, you got to tune out your friends' advice because many of them don't know anything. Because it's they like somebody or they have their list. It's like stock. Think of it as like stock tips, right? you're gonna take stock tips from your one of your friends who doesn't work in finance because they have done their research. Probably not, right? And so campaign giving is kind of like that too.
Okay, and someone's asking, where can we get information about which elections are the closest and most important to donate to?
Yeah, well, this is why it's great to hook up with a funding intermediary because you can just get on their email list and that's the only email you need to read, right? So, if you want to donate to movement groups, these grassroots organizations that are building power. Movement Voter Project is really the best organization. If you go to Movement Voter Project's website, you can donate just generally, and they'll allocate the funds for you. They also have state funds, like you can go and donate to their North Carolina fund or their Wisconsin fund, or you can donate to their Black Mobilization, Get Out the Vote fund. And so there's a lot of options there. If you're more of the data-driven kind of person and you want those numbers and metrics behind every recommendation, then my top suggestion is hook up with Focus for Democracy, which is an excellent organization. In fact, 3 of our top recommendations are recommendations that they have offered, and we piggyback a lot on their analysis. They have great data analysts who works with them, a couple of them, and they do regular briefings. They don't have recommendations right on their website. You got to get on their email them or get on their mailing list. If you like candidates, against my suggestion that you go with organizations, but if you like donating to candidates, as many people do, and it's okay, candidates need money too. I don't want to say they don't. I highly recommend oath.vote. And oath.vote is relatively new funding intermediary kind of recommendation service. And if you go to oath.vote, their criteria for recommending candidates is as follows, which is they look at 3 different things. 1, is it a competitive race? 2, does the candidate need money? Because sometimes these candidates are raising tons and tons of money and they don't really need money. But then there's some other House race or Senate race where the candidate is not raising enough money and those people need money. So Oath kind of does that homework for you. And finally, they analyze, is it a really consequential race? So with state legislative races, for example, there's thousands of them every year. And some of those races really matter because you have a chance, like in Arizona, to flip a state legislative chamber, or maybe both, chambers, or break a Republican supermajority. And then a lot of those, be nice to elect more Democrats to the Idaho State House or whatever, but it's not going to change fundamental outcomes in Idaho, right? So what Oath does is it sort of, in its 3rd criteria, is it rates how important those things are. And then there's swing left, which is another good source of candidate recommendations. So I'd advocate any of those. I mean, to figure out what's competitive, of course, you can go to 538, or if you have money, Cook's Political Report or Sabato's Crystal Ball. I mean, there's, a number of different sources out there, but it's not necessarily the best way to figure out how to allocate your dollars. Better to follow people who are doing the homework for you.
Thank you. Okay, someone is asking, are matching funds a real thing, or are they a gambit to get people to donate? What's going on with matching funds?
It depends. Sometimes matching funds are real, usually not, but sometimes. So Focus for Democracy has real matches from real donors. Like they have a couple of very, very deep-pocketed donors who will put out a match that's actually authentic. But like your typical match in your fundraising email is just not very credible, along with most of the other information probably in that email too, like fundraising deadlines. We need to raise $6,943 by midnight, says Nancy Pelosi, to beat Trump. And as soon as you see that kind of language, just like block that email sender, right? Because it's not it's just not credible. And also, by the way, be very wary of polling. Any kind of polling data that is ever presented to you by a campaign or a fundraising email is usually not trustworthy, because a lot of campaigns will cherry pick polls to either show the race, closer. I mean, you could have like the candidate is likely to win anyway, but they're cherry picking polls to make it seem like a more nail-biting race than it actually is, or they're cherry picking polls to make their candidate seem like they have a better chance of winning than they actually do. So you want to just avoid those poll numbers, and these are all kind of red flags. When you look at a fundraising email, which you shouldn't look at any fundraising emails, but if you do look at fundraising emails and you see this kind of information, just proceed with caution.
That's so helpful. Thank you. And let's see, we've got time, I think, for one or two more. This is a really good question. I am also curious about this. So do the Adam Schiffs, do the people who get more money than they can possibly use, or does even the Kamala Harris, do they get to give some of their money to others legally? Like if they have more money than they can use, can they pass it off or pass it down?
They can, but they usually don't. So you will see, like if you go onto opensecrets.org and look at Adam Schiff's expenditures from his campaign, you'll see some contributions to like the Democratic Congressional Committee. Like sometimes really well-funded Democrats will give to the DCCC to fund, House races that are where more embattled Democrats are fighting for their lives. But by and large, they just keep the money because they, like AOC, who should know better, is another huge Democratic fundraiser who has put out some misleading fundraising appeals. The Republicans, I have a target on my back, because the Republicans hate me and give me money. But, she's in like a plus 30 Democratic district. She doesn't need the money. And she doesn't have a big incentive to give it to candidates who really do need the money, because who knows, maybe she'll run for the Senate sometime, or maybe some primary challenger will materialize a few cycles from now. And, money is always a good thing to have. Schiff used his $20 million for his House campaign in 2022, none of which he needed except to run for Senate, which is how he used that. Right. So,
Okay, one last quick question. Let's do a couple people asking, is it good to give to local Democratic clubs? Is it good to give to Dem state parties? Stuff like that.
Yeah. I think it's probably I don't know. The thing about Democratic Party clubs and committees, and including state parties, which we could talk about a bit, is that they wildly vary in quality. And, the best state parties are real organizing machines, like Wisconsin and Michigan, both have very strong state parties. And the worst are like these sort of cronyist ladder climbing operations that don't really have any organizing capacity. And it's hard to tell the difference between the two. And I think that same rule probably applies to a lot of other Democratic Party entities down the line. So that would not be, unless you have a real close personal connection and know the entity, that would not be my first choice of where to put your dollars.
Okay, thanks, David. I'm going to pass it back to Brett. And thank you all for allowing me to participate in this wonderful discussion.
Jessica, thank you so much for joining us and fielding these questions. I know you have to run to another event, so thank you again. And we'll see you at the next How to Win event. And Liz, would you once again put in the chat the links to the Eventbrites where all of you can subscribe or register for the upcoming How We Win events. And you will be getting some different perspectives in those events. But I think I was really, really impressed with the number and the quality of the questions. I wish we, could answer a lot more of them. Marianne, I see 2 minutes on my clock. Do you have any other question you'd like to ask of David? Sorry to put you on the spot like that.
Sorry, was that to me, Brett? Because
That-
my earphones went off for a minute.
Yeah, no, that was to you. I wanted to see if
Okay, I do have a
you would like
question.
to give David.
David, this is kind of a joke question, but I hope people on the call know who James Carville is, and I do get texts from him. He's kind of a renegade. If you don't know him, he's pretty funny. Would you take his recommendations?
No.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, anytime you see another tip off, red flag, anytime you see a name brand person on a fundraising email, again, proceed with caution.
A lot of these scams that we get in our text messages, or they're just, you wouldn't think they're the highest quality organization.
Yeah, I don't think they have the high. I mean, again, like my focus is on not just pouring more money onto the huge piles of cash being raised by Harris or, Sherrod Brown or somebody, but getting money to organizations that really have sophisticated strategies for winning net democratic votes in battleground states, especially in among groups of voters that really could be crucial and are going to be ignored by Democratic campaigns because they maybe are low propensity voters, or maybe because there's a lot of barriers to engaging them. I mean, it's some groups of voters are very tricky to engage because of language obstacles, because of sort of complex cultural issues or the communities in which they live. And there's organizations that specialize in this that need money a lot more than Harris, does, or top Senate candidates. And so that's where my focus is, and where I think donors can have the greatest impact. We all, if we're a small donor, we really want to make sure that our dollars count, right?
Thank you.
Right. Okay, and I see there was a number of posts about the Environmental Voter Project, and I highly recommended them at the top of the hour. If you came late, you didn't hear that recommendation. I'm putting in the chat a link to our How We Win Zoom with Nathaniel Stinnett. For that, I'm a big supporter of Environmental Voter Project. I recommend that to you. We're a little past the hour. David, I gotta say, you did a fantastic job. I really did learn a lot. We had a lot of comments in the chat from people who echoed that comment, which I think goes to show how generally ignorant most of us are about smart giving. And I think you educated us extremely well. For everybody, again, on the call, Liz and I will be sending you a link to the recording of this event afterwards. That will also go to everybody who registered for the event. And I would encourage all of you, please, when you get that email from us with that link to the recording, share it with your friends, and highly recommend it to them, because I think this is, to me, I think this is a really, really good overview of how to give politically. And I'm going to be rewatching myself, perhaps with my wife, as we talk over what we're going to do. And finally, dig deep in your pockets, folks. There's a lot at stake in this election. Give wisely, give a lot, and let's go win it. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining
Brett, will the links be in the recording, or can we send out the links from the chat separately? The important ones.
I will look into, well, okay, we'll add the links. We'll add the links to the email that goes out with the recording. So you'll
release the blue, at least David's blue tent.
Blue Tent, and and some of the other organizations that David was recommending. So thank you again, everybody, and be sure, please sign up for the next event is Marianne. That's how to win in swing states. And we have, Mary and I and Liz and I have both talked to both of those speakers. It's going to be very good. It's going to be very informative. We have a political scientist who's immersed in this, and we have a Democratic leader and politician is very knowledgeable. It's going to be very, very interesting. Thank you all. Share these links with everybody. Watch the recording. Thank you again. Good night.